When you drive from work to home, do you generally go the same way? When you go to work in the morning, do you generally go the same way? Or any other place? There's probably a lot of places that you go. Have you ever gotten in the car and then all of a sudden you're at work? Mentally? I mean, it's like, what happened to that 5 minutes or that 10 minutes or that 30 minutes? It's gone. All of a sudden I'm there. And that's the brain. That's the brain working in automatic mode. It knows where it's going. It's been there enough times that it goes that way. Have you ever been driving down the road and maybe you're off that day and it's a similar time of day when you might be going to work or coming home from work and you find yourself headed to work or back home or whatever, right? And that's because the brain likes patterns. The brain likes to create these patterns, and it's easier for the brain. The brain really doesn't want to work hard. The brain really wants to take it easy. We have to force our brains to think more critically and more creatively. So you think about it. Raise your hand if you've ever driven a stick shift. All right, good. So most of the people in here. For those of you who've never driven a stick shift, and I'll let the audience, since most of you know this. So when you first drive a stick shift, or when you first, get that experience, are you excited? You're like, yeah, this is cool, right? I mean, growing up, no? It was always cool because all the cool cars had stick shifts, right? And it's like, oh, I can't wait to drive a stick shift. I was really excited. And so I get in the car and I start the engine, that's the easy part. And you push in the clutch and you're supposed to, tell me, what's the combination? What do you have to do with the gas and the clutch and the gear shifter? What all has to happen?
Kind of like this.
Yeah. There's kind of a sequence. There's some balance that goes on, right? You put it in gear, and then you've got to apply just the right amount of gas as you let off the clutch just the right way. And if you don't, what happens? It dies, right? And then you're like, oh man, this is tough. It takes a lot of brain power initially to drive a stick shift, right? Because there's a lot of thought, especially when you're trying to take off. Let's complicate that. Now you're at a stoplight, but you're not just at a stoplight. You're pointed uphill at a stoplight, right? Now what's going through your head? Don't roll backwards and hit the car behind you, and don't go too fast and hit the car in front of you, right? And don't stall. So there's all of that going on in your mind, and you have to think manually to make that happen. But the same is true when it comes to problem solving. You have to get out of the automatic mode, which is where you were this morning. So I hope to move you from automatic mode to manual mode when it comes to solving problems. Because you automatically said the reason you go to causes is because what? Or countermeasures. Because that's what you're asked generally, right? And what do you generally ask your people? Do you ask them to tell you, to describe the problem? What's the standard? What's the current situation? What's the difference between the two? Or do you say, hey, what are we going to do about this? And that's that automatic thinking. And we have to force ourselves to be out of that. So as leaders, one of the biggest things you can help your people to become problem solvers is to ask those questions. Hey, Dan, what's the standard? What is it that we thought was going to happen? Or what was it that we want to happen? Okay, good. Now, what is going on? And what's the difference? And then there's some questions that we'll ask a little bit later on that will help us really define the characteristics of that so that we get a good, clear picture of what's going on. And so, manual thinking versus automatic thinking. We need to get ourselves in manual mode. Even though our brain doesn't like it, it's good for our brain. And the exercises, so for instance, anybody like comedy? Nobody likes comedy, just a couple of people. Nobody likes to laugh. We're not laughing. That's it. So we're going to do an exercise, as I said later on, it comes from the comedy industry or how they create funny things. But what's interesting is that it may be difficult for you initially, but if you practice it, what will happen? It gets easier. Because your brain likes patterns. It's going to figure out the pattern, and it's going to be something that becomes easier for you. So wouldn't it be great if our critical thinking and our creative thinking could be automatic? It would be the automatic way we approach things versus the manual way. And so that's what we're ultimately happen. There's three different types of mindsets. The first mindset, and by the way, there's a big distinction. I want you in your mind mentally now, and write it down somewhere where you'll see it the next time you open this book, or the next time you kick this book across the floor, or something like that. But there's a big distinction between the problem and the root cause. Remember, the problem is the difference between the standard and the current situation. Most people, when they refer to a problem, they're referring to the root cause. The root cause is not the problem, it's the cause. It's why it's happening. So in your mind, mentally, from this point forward, start thinking that way, that the problem is the difference between the standard and the current situation, and then you've got the cause or the root cause, ultimately why this problem exists. And it's important to make that distinction, otherwise you get confused in what you're doing in terms of the solving or being able to solve the problem more effectively. So when we think about that, if we have a standard and we're below that standard or that expectation, we call that reactive mindset. What we're doing is we're waiting till something happens to take us below the expectation before we take any sort of problem-solving activity or thought process. So reactive mindset is the first. The second is where we have a standard, but we know that, think about right now, are there any changes coming in your industry that are down the road? Always? None? Yes? Always? And have you ever taken the time to think about those changes and how those changes are going to impact your business or what you do in your organization? Sometimes? Okay. And so what we call that is a proactive mindset. And we're constantly looking forward. So if we can fix a problem before it happens, we're better off. We spend less time, less energy doing that. So we have the reactive mindset where we react when something falls below standard. We have the proactive mindset, and that's where we're looking to the future to see what problems may occur and then decide how we're going to handle it so that it doesn't or it has minimal impact on us. And then the third one is when we look for new ideas, and we call this innovative mindset. And that's where we say, well, this is where we are today, but sometime in the future, this is what we want to be, this is what we want to create, this is where we want to be, but we're looking to that, and then we're thinking, okay, how do we get from here to there? So those are the three different mindsets that we have in the problem-solving environment. Reactive, and by the way, that's where we spend probably most of our time, is the reactive mindset. We don't get a lot of opportunity to be proactive or innovative. Taiichi Ohno was probably the most well-known engineer at Toyota in Japan, and he brought a lot of things from the way Toyota does business to other businesses and their mindset. And he said, having no problem is the biggest problem of all. I see some heads nodding. Why would you say that's true?
Because then you don't even recognize that you have a problem would be a problem.
If we think we don't have a problem, what happens?
You don't grow.
I'm sorry?
You don't grow or move forward.
Yeah, you don't grow and move forward. And it's a terrible thing to say that we should always be looking for a problem, but in essence, once you solve one problem, you should be looking to the future or anticipating something, or maybe what we can do to be better as an organization. So yes, absolutely. Now this is the process, and this is, they call it how many of you are familiar with PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act? Some? Yes? Maybe? Okay. So this is the process versus effort. And the thing that's really important about the process and the effort is that the right-hand side, the part in the green, if you don't do this part right, it doesn't matter what happens on the other side. It's all going to be wrong anyway. And so a lot of people, what they do when they encounter a problem or they perceive a problem, is they automatically jump to here, or maybe even here, and then they jump into implementation, and then they rarely, if ever, evaluate the results and then standardize. And the reason is because if they don't follow the process and they don't do all these steps, typically the solutions they come up with are ineffective.